Ladies and gentlemen, you know that this channel is not like many other channels. You don't get straight away to the topics, to the body of the text, you deliver the points and then wrap it up and out of here. No, this channel, the videos on this channel is more like going to a restaurant. I give you a starter, a main dish, sometimes intermission dishes more than once, and then you get a dessert, and after the dessert you get sometimes even a coffee with some sweets. And if that sometimes takes a little longer than usually here on YouTube, well, I apologize or not, because if you are in good company, like we all are here in this wonderful community, like being in a good restaurant, who cares about the time? But don't feel embarrassed, as some people wrote to me in the comments, like, I like watching your videos at 1.5 speed. Well, I'm watching my videos at 1.5 speed too, if I check them before release. I can live with that. Don't do it though when we have music examples, because that would of course ruin the entire experience. And so this cool habit of giving to you not only the main dish but everything around that, and hopefully also the experience, won't change in this video, because today we are going to talk about this cool video made by Ben Laude. We're going to extensively talk about a recording made by Raoul Koczalski, who plays Chopin's Nocturne in E flat major 1938. We're going to have a close look at it, as you can see already from the prepared screens. Then we're going to see what Chopin's students had to say about that, and we're gonna connect that to the 11th National Chopin Piano Competition, who starts in January 4th in Miami, Florida 2025. So all of that good stuff, we are gonna dive into that. But before I do that, please like and subscribe this video. I would like to take my channel to 100,000 subscribers. That's a long way. That's a huge stress. I know the topics that we talk about, tempo reconstruction, things like that, are maybe not as sexy as other channels, but I want to do it. With your help, sharing this video, subscribing, liking, the algorithm will really appreciate that. And also, if you want to support the things we're doing, making these videos, but all other cool stuff, as we believe they are cool, please consider becoming a patron. There is a link in the description box. There's a cool community of 150 people. We meet every 2 months. There is a cool podcasts, I think, where we go much more in depth than I can do here on YouTube. Even you get 2 meals for the price of one, than I can do here on YouTube. And so all of that good stuff is linked in the description box below that video. And now, without further ado, let's dive into the body, the main dish of this video. There we go. So Ben Laude is a great guy. He is also host of the Tone-Based Piano channel. And so this video in particular is interesting, caught my attention for several reasons. We're going to listen to that. We're going to listen also to the recording that Ben is featuring here. And his main point is something that I really applaud. Like, he's saying, okay, we have the Chopin competition in a few weeks, but when you search for old Chopin recordings by people who actually were born in the 19th century and have like connections to a kind of 19th century, what we would call the Chopin tradition. Well, if we would play like them today in the Chopin competition, would we actually be rewarded, or would you be rewarded for diving into the historical performance practice and actually applying the things that you can learn from these early performances? Like, for instance, in this case, we're going to listen to Raoul Koczalski. And Ben will make the point like, okay, but the guy is adding a lot of ornamentation, of which he's actually saying, Koczalski, that he was taught this way by Carl Mikuli. You see the picture here on screen. Mikuli, Chopin student. And so Mikuli said to Koczalski, yeah, in this Chopin Nocturne, the famous one, the Opus 9 number 2, well, in that Nocturne, Chopin himself added these notes. So I'm just playing, Koczalski, what Mikuli taught me that Chopin also did. So the point of Ben here is like, okay, the juries of these competitions, they care about authenticity. They want, and that's a very important point, I can only applaud that the jury of these competitions, and I assume also Ben, is looking for like what was in the mind of Chopin, what was the intention of the composer. Well, that's also something we here on this channel, but not only on this channel, also behind this channel, the only thing we do is researching what the intention of the composer was. And you all know, of course, it still is tied to tempo reconstruction in the first place on this channel. But okay, when people say, okay, piano competition in the United States, $100,000 prize money for the first prize only. Well, the jury really wants you to look into the score because we care about what Chopin's intentions were. Well, I can live with that. I can also live with the fact like, okay, we will be making mistakes, obviously, because we don't have recordings by Chopin, right? But we have facts. We have some elements, as Ben is pointing out in the video that I'm about to show you. His point is, when Koczalski adds these ornaments, would the jury of that competition actually reward you for that? Let's just listen to a fragment, and there's a lot we can say about this. So here's a starter in our good restaurant.
This segment of the Chopin Podcast is brought to you by the Chopin Foundation of the United States, presenters of the National Chopin Competition in Miami, Florida, January 2025.
If you look up early 20th century pianist Raoul Koczalski's recording of Chopin's Nocturne Op. 9 No. 2 on the Piano Files YouTube channel, you'll find one Mark Smith 3947 commenting, "Poor guy would get eliminated from the first round of a competition. Wonderful playing. But if Koczalski plays so wonderfully, why does our commenter think a jury would eliminate him?" Well, once you begin to listen, it should become clear, as von Koczalski showers the Nocturne with hundreds of extra notes not found in Chopin's score. No matter how spectacular the playing, your average jury member tends to act on principle in disqualifying any pianist whose interpretation runs deliberately counter to a composer's intentions. But it's more complicated than that. You see, Koczalski studied with Carl Mikuli, a prized pupil and teaching assistant of Chopin, and those extra notes Koczalski is heard adding to the E-flat Nocturne are ones Mikuli heard Chopin himself demonstrate while playing the piece. These elaborate ornaments are now codified in an alternate version of the Nocturne found in the new Polish National Edition edited by Jan Ekier, which is recommended to competitors of the International Chopin Competition in Warsaw. So it should follow that even a conservative-minded jury member of the International Chopin Competition in Warsaw would have to welcome a performance of Opus 9 No. 2 with Chopin's own elaborate decorations. And so if you are preparing for the Chopin competition next year, I hereby challenge you to program the alternate version of Opus 9 No. 2. Although the piece isn't on the list for the required first-round Nocturne performance, you could still add it to one of your solo programs if you made it to subsequent rounds. And if you're so bold, I dare you to add some of your own original and tasteful embellishments. It's what Chopin would have done, after all. Here's Koczalski from 1938.
Okay, and then we get into the Koczalski recording. We're going to touch upon that later, after I just go through the next fragment, which is the dessert of this video. And so remember, keep in mind, remember of the introduction, it's very important that the claim, and I really believe that. I mean, from our perspective, listen, guys, if you're new here, you might be shocked that we make these statements. But if you're a little bit longer here, you know that if you really reconstruct what has been done 200 years ago and what these people were thinking, what these composers were thinking, then you know by now that we are so far away from that practice, from that, you know, the flavor, I would say, of that performance practice of the early 19th century, that yes, I applaud the fact that the jury of a piano competition would really reward like authenticity, but like, what is that authenticity? What kind of reconstruction would they actually go for? Is it really that what this jury, what Ben is after, or is it just that the jury expects pianists, competitors, just to play like they think that Chopin played? And that's a really important question. But let's go to the end of the video and see what Ben has to say about the Koczalski recording and what he would advise competitors to do going into the Chopin competition. He already made that point clear in the introduction, but he will come back to that.
The performance you just heard represents a kind of lost school of bel canto piano playing, transmitted by pupils of Chopin and other 19th century musicians to pianists of the so-called 20th century golden age in the early recording era. It's a tradition rooted in an improvisatory mentality and encourages great liberty and individuality in performance. And you can discover many of the treasures of this era of piano playing on the Piano Files YouTube channel, run by a specialist on historic piano recordings, Mark Ainley.
So now the question is actually this. What Ben is saying here at the end, like Koczalski is one of these voices that transfer you, that like catapult you into the 19th century, into this golden era of bel canto. And when you listen to him, you actually hear what people in the mid-19th century, early 19th century, Chopin is like early 19th century, you should not forget that, is what they actually did. Like this is like a very far echo, which we should be listening more to, because we hear, if not Chopin, we hear something that is very close to Chopin. Now, there are two aspects of something that I really want to take you through. First off, is that really a correct statement? Is what Koczalski is actually playing, the way he's playing, does that reflect Chopin? And is there a way in which we can say, okay, with certainty, with like factuality, that's maybe a very bad English word, but you get my point. Can we say with certainty that what Koczalski is doing is close to Chopin or not? Spoiler alert, it's not. And it's actually very easy to demonstrate that. That's second point. And secondly, we will look at the score. And if the score is really important for the jury of the International Piano Competition in 25 in the United States with that incredible prize money, well, and I really believe that, then the question is, can we point to other facts that are also important and that nobody, literally nobody is doing now and also will not be doing in this Chopin competition? Things that we know as a fact, for sure, that Chopin deeply cared about. So all of that is packed into this Nocturne Opus 9 number 2. First of all, let's go through the recording made by Koczalski. So if you don't know who Raoul Koczalski is, I cannot blame you for that. He was, of course, an important pianist. It's only for the reason that he studied with Mikuli. So let's play a few seconds of that recording while reading the score. Here we go. So we have a few things to go through. So first of all, if we look at this score, I'm sorry to bring it up, but there is a metronome mark. Chopin marked the piece with 8th note 132. And I know if you're new here, you will say, what kind of an idiot is bringing up the metronome mark? Because we have all our own tastes and we have all our developed tastes, and Chopin would be fine as long as you're genuinely looking for a tempo that works. It's about the music. A metronome is such a boring thing. Yes, it's a stupid device. The only thing the metronome can do is give us a frequency per minute. But you know what the cool thing is? The cool thing is when you see that metronome mark, there was one time in Chopin's life, and in all the other composers as well, also Beethoven. I mean, we talk a lot about Beethoven. If you're new here, you will find a lot of videos about Beethoven. And by the way, this is the recording of all the 9 symphonies done in this, what we call whole beat system. And if you're really new here, whole beat simply means you take 2 ticks for 1 on the metronome. You consider the metronome to be a pendulum. I'm sorry to be a little bit all over the place, but it's sometimes very, very hard to have all the information in a video, also for people who are new, which I can imagine. Some people will discover this video thanks to the Chopin competition. So I'm really thankful for that. And so, yes, I have to explain sometimes the things that we research. Like this 2 ticks for 1 is not something that is completely nonsensical. There is a lot of evidence. In fact, we are about to finish the manuscript of a 600 to 700 page book that will guide you through the entire history since the 16th century up to the end of the 19th century, even early 20th century, where just this practice is shown to you. And by the way, the most easy accessible entrance door to this, what we call WBMP, this whole beat reading, this pendulum-like reading, so 1 and 2 2, and 3. That's not crazy, by the way. The majority of pendulums are just read like that, are used like that throughout the history. In fact, the modern reading of the metronome, where you take one tick for the note value in the metronome mark, that's kind of an exception. And so the most easy access door for understanding why this is the only explanation to this mysterious metronome marks is just taking a score and trying for yourself a metronome mark that's written there. Just start with the Czerny Opus 299. That's the famous bundle of etudes. There are metronome marks there, and you will have to imagine that when you sit at your piano, that the first 2 books of the Opus 299, which is etude number 1 till 20, is written for beginners, not first years beginners, but like in the first years. And so sit down and be prepared, because you will have to play up to 15, 16 notes per second constantly. That's impossible. Even if you go online, on the internet, so to say, you will read people saying like, yeah, but it's all doable and this guy all did this Opus 299. Go and try it. Go and try it. I really encourage you to do. And when you cannot, you go to a Beethoven piece, you go to a Chopin piece. The eternal discussion about the Chopin metronome marks. I mean, what is it all about? The metronome marks given even for his etudes, which we consider to be the pinnacle of virtuosity. Well, that's a very moderate problem if you look at the scores, at the etudes, at the compositions that were given or composed at that time. Chopin, I'm sorry to say, I'm not saying he was an amateur, but first of all, even people of tone-based piano himself, like Eric Olson, if I'm not mistaken, said Chopin was a weakling. So how would he have played the things that we today can even not reproduce? So, but seen in the context of what was written in that time, Chopin's etudes even are an updated Kramer, Clementi etude kind of style. Of course, harmonically, that's a completely different world, but in technique, it's nothing compared to the Liszt transcendental etudes. It's nothing compared to the Harry Hertz or Hertz compositions or etudes. Like there has been crazy stuff published in the time. Most of that music we don't play anymore, and so we don't know it anymore. And we stick to Chopin, and we see in him the absolute top of virtuosity, which he himself was never. He was not remotely close to what Franz Liszt was. And I could elaborate on Liszt as well. So my point is, if you sit at your piano, and for those of you who watch all my videos, I'm sorry to elaborate on this because you all know that, but I have to make this point for also people who are new here, then you will feel, you will see, you will witness with your own eyes, this modern reading of those metronome marks do not make any sense. That has a huge complication, of course, because here, 132, that's the first thing we have to look at. These composers were very strict with their metronome marks. Why would they give them? And if you would say like, they were not, okay, I could live with that. But that at a minimum, we should be able to reproduce that. I'm not saying in this case it's not possible. Well, actually, it is not. If we just calculate the average of this piece in Koczalski recording, then we have a few bars. Come back to that, poco ritardando, poco rallentando. At the end, we have here a stretto, 1 1/4 bar, and then we have 1 bar senza tempo. So if we calculate the average of Koczalski's tempo, he's not playing an 8th note 132, it's playing an 8th note 99. So 99 is not just a little bit slower, it's like massively slower. Now, if you listen to the first bars of the performance, you will notice that he is faster than 99. Koczalski starts in a tempo around 120. He goes down immediately to 110. But just as an exercise, before we even dive into the art of bel canto and see if this bel canto way of playing, or the way of playing like these ornaments, that is what it is about, is really something that could go back to Chopin, just try to follow the tempo based off the left hand. And just think of something that, okay, we should be able to have a certain rhythmical progression here that makes sense. Just let's listen to Koczalski again. Just this one ornament, da dee da 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 team. I guarantee you, when you calculate this tempo here, you will arrive at whole beat, which is then in modern reading 8th note 66, something like that. So taking so much time here, where is that in the score? Let's just continue. So here, this bar, he goes here into a tempo that is almost whole beat, almost half of that. So he goes, you can say, okay, the guy didn't take notice of this metronome. Of course not, it's one of my first points. They weren't interested in reconstructing what Chopin had in mind. They just played like everyone else in that time. And performance practice, that of course developed. It's still developing. We don't play anymore like this. And I mean, the mainstream, you won't hear in the piano competition in 25 in January in the United States, in Miami, any pianist playing like that. And why? I mean, this kind of dealing with the score, where in the first half you go extremely slower compared to your own tempo. The point is, in many instances, these musicians, great musicians, they go in a tempo that is close to half of this. Why? Because it's naturally baked into the composition. They also feel that. And then they compensate for that in the second half of the bar. So you could say, if you calculate the tempo, that Koczalski is playing here around 72, and here he goes up even above 132. Well, that's not written in the score. We will see in this book, just in a second, that is also not something that Chopin would have appreciated. So only from that perspective, you could say, like Koczalski, if this is really what Chopin had in mind, why would Chopin not have marked that? And now you could say, like, but Chopin marks ritenutos. And obviously, that's what many people say, obviously, he's doing that in the spots, those spots where it is an exception. Because where you feel it, same thing with pedaling. When you feel it, of course, there's no necessity to write it down because, yeah, there everybody would do it. Well, I have news for you. This is not something anyone would feel. This is something that Koczalski is imposing on the score because he likes it. There is also a necessity to do that because he needs time to make this ornament really matter. And since his tempo is way too high, 120 is way higher than the whole beat authentic reading of this metronome, which is in modern reading 66. So he has no other option than each and every time you have an ornament to slow down. But if Chopin would only mark the ritenutos and the rallentandos in the exceptional places, well, what is this? Is this an exceptional place? Poco ritardando, just before this high B, I would say this is a very natural place to slow down a little bit. Poco ritardando. Here, poco rallentando a tempo, beginning of the theme again. It makes sense, right? So this is a very obvious place. This is a very obvious place. Poco ritardando, again, same place, obvious place. But if Chopin marks the poco ritardando, poco rallentando, poco ritardandos, poco rubato, why would he not mark the excessive rubatos if that was really what he had in mind? Why would you mark the poco something when the allots are just baked into the score? I don't see the logic of that. I don't see the logic of that. And by the way, even before we go to Eigeldinger, and by the way, this is a book everybody should have, I will go even one step further. Forget about historical sources. Just think from a modern perspective. What is tempo rubato? Tempo flexibility. Around what? It revolves always around a certain tempo, right? It goes up, it goes a little down. How much? Up to you. But what Koczalski is doing has nothing to do with tempo rubato because you don't have any tempo anymore. I'm not saying that you cannot like that recording. By all means, I mean, of course, it's super interesting to listen to. It's a voice from the past, from the very distant past. It's like almost 100 years ago. That's a long time. And by the way, you have to go 100 years further back in time from Koczalski to arrive at Chopin, someone he never heard. That's also something we have to keep in mind. And so what Koczalski is doing is like a freestyle of tempo. There is no tempo anymore. You just freestyle through the piece. And wherever you feel that you have to take the tempo down, in many instances because your basic tempo is too fast, then you just do it. Obviously, that has nothing to do anymore with tempo rubato. This is a style of playing that was developed in the second half of the 19th century, more towards the end. Even Edvard Grieg commented on that. He said, like, in one of his letters, like, yeah, these rubato conductors, meaning like these conductors that their tempi was all over the place. Edvard Grieg was the Leipzig school. He came from the school of Moscheles. That's the Schumann school, the Mendelssohn school. That's a school that really took care about tempo. They played in a very strict tempo. Read what Schumann wrote about that. It's unbelievably different from what we today do. But anyways, Chopin was part of that time. So here, this book, I can only recommend it to anyone. So let's read what Chopin's student had to say about rhythmical strictness. So Streicher, through Nix, says, Chopin required adherence to strictest rhythm, hated all lingering and dragging, misplaced rubatos, as well as exaggerating ritardandos. Je vous prie de vous asseoir. Pray do take a seat, he said on such an occasion with gentle mockery. Well, only this quote. Just take the Koczalski recording. He hated all lingering and dragging, misplaced rubatos, as well as exaggerated ritardandos. I mean, we just went through the score, right? You play whole beat here, and then you speed up from 72 to 140. Talking about facts, well, this quote is not saying how much freedom you had, but we can take it as a fact. We don't have as much freedom as Koczalski did. By far not. And you could also say as a fact, what Chopin is actually saying here, through the words of Streicher and Nix, is Koczalski is absolutely not what I intended. Okay. And there we have Mikuli. For those of you who are longer on this channel, you know this quote. In keeping time, Chopin was inexorable, and some readers will be surprised to learn that the metronome never left his piano. By the way, I wonder, why would he leave his metronome on his piano? Just because it was a beautiful device that he admired? I guess we can all agree on the fact that Mikuli actually is saying here, Chopin's metronome was always on his piano because he was using it constantly. Even in his much maligned tempo rubato, the hand responsible for the accompaniment, we all agree that's the accompaniment, right? The hand responsible for the accompaniment would keep strict time, while the other hand, singing the melody, would free the essence of the musical thought from all rhythmical fetters, either by lingering hesitantly or by eagerly anticipating the movement with a certain impatience, vehemence akin to passionate speech. That's Mikuli. That's the same Mikuli where Koczalski studied with. And so now my question to you is, why didn't he do that? It's not strict time. In fact, you cannot measure his beginning tempo. It's impossible. He starts in 120 and here is already in another tempo, just like on the spot. That's a practice. It's just not Chopin's practice. In 1838, Chopin's tradition was far gone. What you hear there, actually Koczalski play, is the late 19th century Chopin tradition that completely replaced the original one. And you could say and Mikuli was not teaching that? Well, we don't know, but apparently either these people didn't take that into account or didn't care or they evolved further from Mikuli, or Mikuli was actually also updated. And when these people write, you could say okay, but they write about Chopin. Yeah, this is something, guys, you have to really keep in mind. What you read here is not necessarily what Mikuli did on stage or what he actually was teaching to his students. I'm not saying he didn't. But I'm not saying he did. It's something when these people wrote about the past, from their memory, how Chopin actually regarded his music in the best way to be played. That's what these quotes are about. Don't take that one-to-one to his teaching lessons. I would say the chances are big that it came up. But performance practice evolved, and in the end of the 19th century, it was already light years, if not universes away from what we had in the early 19th century and in the time of Chopin. Here, Viardon, through Saint-Saëns. Through Madame Viardon, I learned the true secret of tempo rubato, where the accompaniment holds its rhythm undisturbed, while the melody wavers capriciously. You can see it in the score. It's just there. It's not what Koczalski is doing. And by the way, Koczalski is not an exception. All these pianists of the early 20th century have exaggerated. I would not call it rubato freestyle tempo. It's there is no tempo anymore, and especially not in that kind of music. Sooner or later to fall back upon its axis. This way of playing is very difficult. Yes, it's extremely difficult since it requires complete independence of the two hands. By the way, Koczalski doesn't possess that quality. The right hand goes down in tempo, well, the left hand follows. It requires complete independence of the two hands, and those lacking this give both themselves and others the illusion of it by playing the melody in time and dislocating the accompaniment so that it falls beside the beat. So you have also these early recordings where people play besides the beat and the left hand earlier or later. That's apparently through Viardon and Saint-Saëns was not the practice of Chopin. You end at the same time. So this continues. These sources continue. You come even here to this famous quote by Franz Liszt. Is it here? Look at these trees, Liszt said. The wind plays in the leaves, stirs up life among them. The tree remains the same. That is Chopinesque rubato. So, Liszt, unbelievable. So that is your tree. Strictly in time. As Mikuli also said, I don't know if you went through that comment, it's your choir master. This is your choir master, Chopin said, and this remains just stable in tempo. So, guys, just by looking at this score, connecting that to Raoul Koczalski, and you can say all what Wim Winters is doing and all this authentic sound and tempo reconstruction stuff is all nonsense. Okay, I get it. First of all, metronome marks are not nonsense. They were given by the composer. And if you are already slower at the beginning, why on average you would go 25% slower? That's an interesting question, right? And then even knowing that you go slower, quote unquote, because we think it's much faster what Koczalski is playing, which is not surprisingly, tempo went up in the 19th century. Don't let anyone fool yourself saying that in the 19th century, because of this Wagner effect, that the tempo went down. They didn't. We don't have sources for that. We have nothing for that. When people say that, and raise your hand and say, Mr. Professor, or Mr. Musician, or Mr. Scholar, or Mr. Musicologist, give me a quote for that. There is none. There is none. There is only quotes of people saying, guys, what's wrong with you? You play Beethoven in 1863, went over it with not Karl Marx, with Adolf Bernhard Marx, saying why are you playing that so much faster? Don't use Beethoven for that. Same with Chopin. We showed you recently the score made in the end of the 19th century, 1870-ish or something. It's a Peters edition. Go back a few videos and you'll find that. And where you have metronome marks that are not Chopin's for the etudes, where the editor says like, yeah, I changed the metronome marks according to the Chopin tradition, how Polish players play Chopin. Well, these metronome marks, seen as today, from the today's perspective, I would say, they are slower than Chopin's metronome marks. On paper, they are. And not by a small margin. And you could say like, see, that is proof of how much slower performance practice became in the 19th century. But no, go to the original source. I want the pianist play all the Chopin's tempi in tempo. And by the way, Opus 10 number 1, it's allegro, eh? Number 2, it's allegro. It's not presto, not even prestissimo. So where is the margin even to speed it up when it's only written allegro? So just first, my point is first reproduce that and then go to the Polish players. But if you cannot reproduce that, then you come to a conclusion that we cannot reproduce these metronome marks. And so where's our foundation to call an edition like that, where you have quote-unquote slower metronome marks to say, okay, people wanted to slow down? No, the reverse is actually what's happening. Chopin's metronome marks were obviously whole beat. So in our modern sense, you would say you have to halve the speed of the metronome marks. And then you look at these Polish great players, and what happens then? Surprise, surprise, they didn't slow down. They sped up, and not by a little. Also free time, we made a video on that. Same thing, puzzled by the metronome marks by Chopin. And so this evolution of going faster and faster and faster, of course, hit also Koczalski. And there he comes to this Nocturne, which then they played it in a way that made sense in that performance tradition. And now this is exaggerated rubato. Of course, we all see that today. Why? Because we don't do it anymore. And therefore, it sounds... We'd still do it, by the way, but not in this exaggerated way. But just we went over nocturnes in past videos. I mean, you can look it up, or tempo reality checks. It's always the same thing, beginning tempo too high. And before you say like, okay, but metronome marks are just boring, nobody takes care. Yes, everybody takes care of the metronome mark. This is what drives people to play it faster and faster and faster. But if you then say like, why don't you play in the metronome mark? They say, well, who cares about the metronome marks? Good sir, that's my tempo. Okay, we leave out the metronome mark and then we play it in a tempo that reflects the frequency per minute. And then the same people will say like, hey, can't you read the metronome mark? There is a tempo and so this annoys me a little bit. It's one or the other. But these people that played like faster and faster, not because of the metronome marks per se, but because everybody did it like that. It was a natural evolution. We always go faster, louder, stronger, shorter. That's still happening today. The average attention span, look it up. The way we actually walk. Someone wrote me in an email recently, also that tempo goes up. And so the only thing that is happening now is that these recordings are so much faster than Chopin that we have the impression that Chopin was just a little faster on these lighter pianos. That doesn't happen. Whenever you play on those contemporary pianos, it won't help you. There is no aftertouch, there's no double escapement. Good luck with that. But my real question would be, now that you know all of this, we have gone over the tempo, we have gone over our whole beat practice. And again, if you say it's all nonsense, don't say it, pause the video, go at your piano and try it. There is no other solution. There is no escape. Metronomes marks of that time read in the modern way are super problematic. We all know that. We all know that. It's just admitting it, and especially publicly towards each other, is huge, because when you admit it, then the question is, what's the solution to that? And metronome can be used in two ways, legitimate two ways. The modern reading, single beat or a whole beat reading. That's it. It gives a frequency per minute. You don't have more options. When one doesn't work, the other is what remains. And so my real question now is that we know that Chopin wanted to play this piece in tempo, but the ornaments don't work in 132, literally in eighth note. So we know, and I hope you kind of start thinking about it as well, that this real authentic Chopin played this much slower, that it becomes also an andante, by the way. Then you can play all the ornaments within the structure of time, then you don't need excessive rubato. Then the poco rallentando in that tempo really becomes a rallentando poco because your tempo is strict and then suddenly you go down a little bit. Well, that's a huge element. So when you know all of that, we have metronome marks for the etudes. I'm sure in the competition people will have to play the etudes. What will the jury say if someone shows up, if our Alberto comes there and plays his etudes in this way, as we have recorded them, and they're on the channel, some of them, and they will be released next year, in so-called half tempo. It's not half tempo, by the way, because nobody plays these etudes in full tempo, not all of them. The Opus 10 number 3 went over that. La Tristesse, everybody plays it in whole beat. There it's okay, because we are used to that. So there comes your competitor in the competition, and he or she plays really according to diving into sources, logical thinking. You know the answer to that. And I'm really curious also what Ben would be thinking about this. And so it would be really cool to talk to each other. There is a link in the description with my website. There is a contact page. Ben, if you're watching this, I know the videos are very long. Hopefully you clicked on the 1.5 or 1.75 speed, because that makes the videos shorter, obviously. That you reach out to us, and even a private conversation would be cool, but we would be more than happy, Alberto and I, to just come on your podcast or your videos and just talk about it. Nobody is forced to do anything. Sometimes we get this like reproach, like, yeah, but you want, everybody's wrong and you're right. No, we just look at some facts and we really care about the intention of the composer. Like Ben said at the beginning, he does. I know the jury of the piano competition. I know these people do, but they don't always realize that. Like how to look at the facts. What are the facts? What are the problems we need to solve? Is what we actually think Chopin sounded like really close to that? Well, Koczalski not, but all the modern performers, I can go over those scores in the same way I actually did it. Well, the answer is like, okay, but then if we know there's a huge problem and the solution is drastic, therefore we call this a paradigm shift. Our book will also be called A Paradigm Shift in Classical Music. Are we willing to go there? The first reaction would be of many people, are you out of your F mind? Because the music sounds like horseshit. Yeah, I wouldn't say that, because many Chopin nocturnes are played in whole beat. Just go the Opus 27 number 2. If you don't believe me, just check the tempi. The people in the Chopin competition will be playing, if they play the Chopin Opus 27 number 2, that's a D flat major, they will be playing it in all beat. No doubt, because that's how everybody plays it. So in Chopin's case, I wouldn't be too sure to say that. And you know what? Those pieces are high on the list of what everyone prefers. Because it will happen. That will happen when you play in this tempo, when you really let it sink, when you learn to play like that. This is not easy. If someone who's playing in the mainstream, also in the hip performance practice of today, it's not possible to do that right away. You need time. Some can do it very easily. Some will need 6 months, a year. You have to develop a new way of playing, new way of accentuation. Every time everything changes. But once you do that, guys, this is just unbelievable. This is just unbelievable. Listen to it 5 times. There is a link in the description box. You can go on Bandcamp. You can listen 3 times for free. And then you have to pay us. It's 4 years of work, eh? But do it. Listen 3 times. But I would really appreciate also Ben's reaction if it's only private. And let's talk publicly. There is no one who's losing his face. You know all my story. I could have started this 10 years ago. I didn't. Why? I didn't see it. It took me 7 years, even working with Lorenz, my partner, a co-author for the book. It took me a long time. Everybody's looking in one direction. It's very hard to do that. But let's talk about that. Okay. Long video, again, podcast, you know me. Let me know in the comments if you're still here. You get a little heart. You know I'm doing it. Because I really appreciate. It's about music. We have to share these composers. But when we look at the facts sometimes are also in music what they are. Okay. Let's not make it any longer than necessary. Good YouTube practice. Guys, thank you for being here. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your interest. I read the comments. You know that. I did not respond to all of them. I could not do that. But the only thing I would be doing is just responding to your comments, but I really appreciate all of you here. We're in this together, and that's a strong point I want to make. We are in this really together. And having said that, that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching. We see each other very soon again. Bye.